they get the chance. They were born in bloody circumstance. To go, leave me, run like you've never run before. A voice from the underground, given room to breathe, not puppy drowned. So die if you get the chance. Better men than you've been, let this dance. To go, leave me, run like you've never run before. I have seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me away. To go, leave me, run like you never did. No, believe me, run like you've never run before.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast. It is myself, John Anderson, hosting tonight for a very special episode, a very possibly quite unique episode. We'll do some introductions. We've got some special guests with us tonight. I've got my regular with me, Craig. Good to see you, Craig.
Hi, good evening.
And from his from you've not been on in a wee while, Ian. It's great to see you.
Well, it's a podcast, John, so not many people can see me. But I admire your sentiment. Hello, brother from another mother.
Oh, thank you. And yes, sorry to those listening on audio. Ian is what was the famous snooker thing? He's hitting the ball beside the red one on for those on black and white televisions. Yeah,
brown ball is beside the pink.
And there's Rona in the background. Hi, Rona.
Yeah, see, she was concerned about this. We're going to have to change angle. Hang on, right?
Change angle now.
Oh, there we go. That works fine. I can still see my telly. Good.
And
with all my links.
We have a very special guest tonight. We have Nix joining us. Nix, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's great to have you along. Obviously, the subject matter tonight, those of you watching this live, or those of you who are maybe listening to this afterwards, you'll have seen the note on the subject matter tonight. Just we will be talking about Siobhan Cattigan. We're going to spend the whole episode covering the story that has come out in the last few weeks. Some of the revelations that have come out in the press, and we're going to look at that in a bit of depth. Obviously, again, I just have to reiterate that there might be some distressing or upsetting themes tonight. So if you're listening, please, feel free to take that under advisement, or if you are affected by anything that's mentioned in this podcast, I'll put the warning out just now. If you are affected by anything, you can reach out to any one of us on the podcast. My messaging and DM is always open for any of the themes we touch on tonight. That is the warning bit. This is so difficult. We're obviously talking about a tragic event that Craig, you were on the podcast many months ago when the story broke that Siobhan Cattigan, aged 26, had passed away suddenly. That was in November of 2021. We covered it at the time. We talked at length about our achievements. 19 caps for Scotland. Was part of the squad who were riding on a high at the time in terms of World Cup qualification was potentially on the cards at that point, and it was obviously an absolute body blow to anyone involved in Scottish rugby at the time, and we all kind of felt it very acutely. I mean, given your connection with the women's game as well, Craig, it would have obviously been a bit more difficult for you at the time.
Yes, to be perfectly honest, it doesn't really matter how I feel about it. It's for me, it's the big shock and the big the terrible fact of it is that there's a family involved in this. There's a partner involved in this. There's friends. There's teammates that have all been hugely affected by the loss of Siobhan, and I certainly, my heart still goes out to them for such a tragic loss at the time, and still what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that does lead us on to, obviously, I was actually speaking to the guys before the podcast, and actually we were commenting that from November when we heard the news, it was very quiet. There was no kind of further follow up. There was very little in terms of sort of, you would expect to see some remembrance stuff and things like that, and it was fairly quiet, fairly subdued. And then a couple of weeks ago, we had the Times broke an article, interview with Siobhan's parents, which, if you haven't read it yet, I highly implore you to go and do so. It is an extremely distressing read. It's very, very difficult to get through. What we are going to do tonight, we're going to walk through just some of the key things that have come out of that article and just talk a wee bit about that, and then we'll come back to sort of look at some more of those things.
John, can I just say, I was listening to Jim Hamilton's podcast from yesterday, and he has Professor Bill Ribbons on it, who's a sports medic, massively, he's worked with Northampton Saints, the RFU, all sorts of people, and knows David Walsh. David Walsh says that it is the most important article that he has ever written, which, bearing in mind that this is the guy who exposed Lance Armstrong, puts this strongly into perspective.
Yeah, that was one of when I was thinking about sporting scandals and things, and Lance Armstrong had crossed into my mind. So that's, if David Walsh is saying that is obviously huge. So I think we should get into the crux of the matter now.
Yeah, well, let's look at some of the things. So I'm going to kind of go following the article. I'm going to start to look chronologically. Obviously, the article itself touches a lot on the fact Craig's rightly pointed out. There's a family, there's a partner, there's basic humanity and real people involved in this. So, but let's start February 2020. Siobhan, there was a concussion. Quite a clear concussion. Seems to be the first one that's documented. Concussion will be a recurring theme throughout this, of course. The article suggests that she was allowed to then travel to go back to Callendar home, and then was called back to have to return to camp, and done that quite a few times over the week. So 5 days of travel, 100 miles a day driving, whilst still showing concussive symptoms, and then played against Ireland 7 days later. This was 2020. Just to be very clear, we talk in rugby. I'll come to you with this, Ian, because I know you've got views on this. We talk a lot in rugby about duty of care and how far we've progressed in terms of head injuries. That's pretty shocking.
Well, it seems to be a common theme throughout all of the world, whereas we talk seriously about brain injuries and mental health problems, and it's all talk and very little action. Sorry, on you go next.
I was going to say, Bill Ribbon's on this podcast because I listened to it in preparation for coming on here. And I'm just to make it clear, I'm not a medic. I can't. It's really interesting. But he was. I mean, what was it? 2011. Until 2011, it was an automatic 3-week stand down if you had a concussion.
That's right. Yeah.
And now it's not. And so they talk about progress, and you have to think, well, the people playing rugby have only got bigger since 2011. They've only got stronger. So why is it now 6 day? Well, it's not, because World Rugby have changed. The graduated return to play is in theory from the 1st of July. It's changed to 12, 13 days. But why was it ever reduced from 3 weeks anyway?
Yeah, because that's a clear sign of regression, and that's even possibly some of the facts were known. They were just suppressed, which maybe conspiracy theorists, but there's stuff. There are articles which expose the fact, especially in Aussie rules football, where they suppressed, and also in the NFL, as we know, they suppressed knowledge of concussion injuries, and that's part of the larger case. But yeah, so, like I said, it seems to be more lip service being paid than actual paying heed to it. As seems to be it's you ring the bell, you put the right tweet out, you say all this and that, but then you don't actually follow it through. And it's only when people come forward, like Siobhan's parents, and say, actually, this is what happened. That's when it gets exposed for the seemingly nonsense that it is.
It's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because we are still in a situation, even just in this last summer series, Craig, we're still banging the concussion drum. We're still talking about players who maybe return to play protocols don't necessarily seem to be not that they're not being adhered to. I'm not going to suggest that, but that return to play protocols are being utilised at their absolute minimum. And guys who have histories, thinking about Johnny Sexton, for example, guys with histories of significant amounts of concussive episodes in their career are being patched up and sent back on. And I've got no doubt in my mind that Johnny Sexton is 100% certain in his mind he wanted to play. Of course he did, but it just strikes me as, and all these examples. I was reading that, and I did do a double check in the date, because I was thinking, is that 2010 or 2020? Because that it seems like such a backwards thing to have. Even like if any of us go to a doctor tomorrow with a concussion, we'll be told not to drive. We'll be told not to travel. We'll be told to kind of rest. It seems strange, but so that's what was reported in the article. We then move on to.
Sorry, John. You asked me a question. You asked me a question. Do you want me to answer it, or? Oh,
sorry, Craig. Please do.
No. I just on my side of things, as far as I'm concerned, I totally understand, and I have on this podcast discussed the Johnny Sexton side of things, etc. Where the difference lies is that within professional sport, it's a professional job. Okay, we're not talking about the women's game here because they're not professionals, but at that level, the diagnostic side of things comes in, and that is getting better and better and better every year. So we do have not just team doctors, but we have World Rugby doctors involved in all international games now. I cannot, and I'm saying this right now, comment on the women's international game because I don't know the setup, because I've not really investigated the setup into the international game for women. As we know, it's always behind the curve when it comes to something like this. But what I will say to those that are listening and watching, that within the club game, it is down to coaches. And there is no diagnostic that you can do on the side of the pitch, at the side of the pitch, or in the club rooms to ensure that person is returning onto the field in a correct way, because we are not doctors. We are not, we're not medical professionals. So on my side of things, from my coaching side of things, I have done it once, put someone back onto the field who absolutely 100% told me that they were 100% okay. Everything that I'm told to look at and to check, all was fine. And then when I saw them running back on the field, I called them back off and said, no, you're not going to continue. But 99.9% of the time, depending on the coach, the players are the players are coming off the field and they are not going back on, no matter whether I think that they're okay to go back on, or whether they think they're okay to go back on. It's we follow the guidelines of, if in doubt, set them out. The big problem you have is the coach, and what the coach does, and who are around them and who are supporting them around on the field, and whether they give them the backup or support, or the other way around, the pressure to put a player back on the field. And those are the sort of the things that I guess are the worrying part of it all. I think the diagnostic is getting better and better and better, but it's more for me the worry of the pressure, the everything surrounding, going from all the way from minis all the way up through to international.
Absolutely, and that rings true actually in the next incident or a situation that we're going to talk about. Moving on to April 2021 Six Nations game against Wales, Siobhan Cattigan takes a knee to the head and goes off for a head injury assessment. Has a bit of blood as well, and it's going to one of the accusations that's come out of the article is that there was pressure from the head coach, Brian Eason, for Siobhan to get back on the park, and the language used was quite colourful, but this obviously this has been strenuously denied by the SRU, and I have to reiterate that. But the article itself does indicate that Siobhan passed that message on to a number of players. Nix, you've read this part of it. What was your initial feeling there? And
it's so difficult because, well, it's what Craig was saying. It comes down to the coach. It's pressure. It's peer pressure. It's a cauldron, and that's one of the reasons for the HIA in the elite game that they're taken off the pitch, because it's supposed to take that pressure away. But I think, what really strikes me is you've effectively got one person's word against another. And this is the first point that I think this is why the SRU should have commissioned an independent investigation as soon as they heard about these allegations. Because you can't have a coach doing that. We saw it in the under-20s game. I think it was England against Italy with the French female referee in the last under-20 Six Nations. The pressure that medic was putting, and the referee was absolutely superb. But you think there's a lot of people who, medics, referees, all of that, who can't stand up to somebody putting pressure on. I don't think that the medics in the and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that there are independent medics for the Scotland women's team in the Six Nations. So that, again, you've got a conflict of interests there. What position is that putting the medic in? I think the whole thing, it's just heartbreaking at the end of the day. And you think you've got a girl who's, a head injury, a possible injury, all of this, and what she believes she's hearing, and whether or not she did hear. I mean, that's, I've got to be very careful with the language I use here, but she genuinely believed that she was hearing that message coming through. She's a team player. I mean, from everything I've heard about her, she was the ultimate team player. Of course, she wants to get back out there. The other reason for the head injury assessment is, players want to play. I mean, it's what Craig was just saying about the player who wanted to go back on the pitch and he pulled him off. Players want to play, and that's why these protocols have to exist, because they are there to protect the players from themselves. I mean, I know I've had a concussion. I was an absolute bampot. I was absolutely hopeless. I couldn't have made a decision to save my life. And if somebody had said to me, well, I mean, I got mine skiing. I didn't get mine playing rugby. I would have quite happily skied with it if somebody hadn't said to me, no, absolutely not. And it just, so, I mean, it's just so difficult.
It really is a difficult situation, and obviously I can't comment on it because I know Brian very well, so I honestly cannot. I would not want to be commenting or drawn into it. But it's the. Am I right in saying within the timeline that she did have an HIA and she was taken off the field and had an HIA, and then she passed the HIA and went back on the field? Mm-hmm. So at that point in time, and again, this is not. I'm not trying to change the argument. I'm not trying to just to do it. But if she passes the HIA with a doctor, no matter what the coach is saying, whether the coach is saying, is she okay, blah blah blah, or get her on the field. If she's passing the HIA, then the right of the coach is to put her back on the field. And so that's that. No matter what their words, what wording is said or has been, indicated that has been quoted as being said. If she's passed her HIA, then she's free to go back on the field. And so it's a really where I've probably got more of a problem with it all is the fact that the HIA process correct? Is and when we've discussed, for example, Johnny Sexton and things like that, we've discussed that if there is someone who has quite obviously taken a hard piece of a body to another to a head, do we in fact even check them at the side of the pitch, or take them to a little office inside the changing room and check them that way? Do we just say they're done for the day because that's what we do? Because honestly, in my opinion, in my mind, I'm not a medical professional, but if someone's taking a knee to the head, they're going to be impaired no matter what, whether it's pain or whether it's a concussion. So it's a really difficult situation to be. We obviously need to look at, and I guess I cut off for a little while, but I guess what you're saying earlier on about 2010 and 2020 is that World Rugby are regressing in their safety concerns rather than accelerating their safety concern.
So one thing that
one of the reasons one of the reasons that I think I've been invited on is that I'm a member of the core working group of Progressive Rugby, which I was invited to join in April. And again, like all of you, I'm not a medic, and I have learned a frightening amount of stuff about the HIA process. So HIA step 1, while it can confirm a concussion, it cannot actually rule out a concussion. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, as a layperson, is really quite terrifying. And then there's, and you get this a lot. I think it was the first South Africa New Zealand test match. It was when Faf de Klerk got taken off. and the pundit or the commentator said, "Oh, he's gone for an HIA." And, you know, a year ago, before I was involved with progressive rugby, I wouldn't have questioned that. I immediately put a tweet out going, he hasn't gone for an HIA. He's off the pitch because he's just been knocked out. And it's the language, especially that commentators use around, and pundits, that they use around this. You know, he's gone for an HIA. No, he's clearly showing level 1 concussion symptoms. That's not an HIA. That's straight off the pitch. So, I mean, as you were saying, Craig, if somebody's taken a knee to the head, they shouldn't be going through the HIA process. They should be having a sit down on the bench and being monitored for the rest of the match.
What I'd ask as well is, I mean, is the HIA process actually fit for purpose? Is there a way that players can maybe train themselves to figure out? Because it's like 3 questions, like sort of, where are you? You know, do you know where you're playing? What's the score? That kind of thing.
There was a really interesting article in Wales Online earlier this week, might be the end of last week, which explains what happens when a player goes off the HIA and the baseline testing that they do. And so they do a test at the beginning of every season, and I don't know the details of the test, but basically the conspiracy theory is that you could fudge that test, get quite a low score, and then so if you get taken off for an HIA, you are more likely to pass that HIA. Yeah. And I don't think, because then I was asking one of the medics in progressive rugby, I was asking if they compare the baselines year on year. Because, I mean, I'm a risk specialist. That's my kind of thing. And it's like, well, you know, do you look and see if there's been a deterioration during the season? And he said, I don't think they do. And that, again, I'm like, well, I mean, surely that's just common sense. And also because then if somebody is trying to play the system, you're far more likely to pick it up.
Yeah, we did some work a few years back, where we worked with a fairly renowned brain specialist, and we brought in a similar test that they do with the NFL, and we just trialed it. It wasn't used as a you've got concussion or you haven't got concussion and you go and play. We didn't. It was just something to trial, and it was you took you had an iPad and you had to answer. There was a numerical set of questions on the iPad or I'm trying to remember back. It was something to do with you had to match numbers on an iPad, and you were timed at the start of the season. All of your times were then taken, and then if you suspected suspected a head knock, we would take the player, put them in front of the iPad, and ask them exactly the same question and time it. And you had if they're lower than this time, it's okay, or the same time. If it's higher than this time, then there's an HIA. There's a head knock here and there's a concussion. Now it wasn't a concussion. Sorry, it was there's something happened and you can't. They shouldn't be playing anyway. We never used it that way. We did do the tests on players that had agreed to do that, but I think the test is a similar.
I think so. Yeah.
Thing.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, but there's definitely, we never discussed about matching it, trying it every 6 months and resetting it every 6 months or comparing any, because we just tried it out. It was just something to as part of the study. But I think if and again, this is conjecture, but if it's being used as an HIA, it's being used as is this person concussed? No. Okay, on the back on the field, because that's they're professional, and again I use that in in context with the women's game that they're not, but they're in a high performing sport, so they're looking for a quick check to make sure everything's okay and then stick them back on the field. And that's where again I slightly have a difference with the I'm maybe looking at this on the other side of things of maybe, we're needing to do more with that process rather than what the coaches were using at that point in time, because at that point in time, it may not have been fit for purpose, but that's what they were told to use, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's the protocol. That's what's in place, and I don't think. I mean, it's a World Rugby protocol.
Yeah.
It's not with the best will in the world, it's not for the SRU or any other union to change. I mean, they could, I suppose. There is nothing to stop them advising World Rugby or saying we don't think it works, getting somebody like James Robson up in front of World Rugby. But at the end of the day, that one does come from World Rugby.
Yeah, and then you get and I hope this isn't taken as me being frivolous, but you then have a situation where, if, for example, the SRU took a stand and said, if any of our international players, if we have any doubt at all in our mind that they've got a concussion, they're coming off the field, you then have external pressures, as in, I'll call them shareholders, but people involved in the SRU. Then you have people, fans. You then have pundits, you then have press all saying, well, why did Hamish Watson not come on the field? And then you have Hamish Watson out in the background going, I was fine, I didn't, I could go back on the field. And so it all then creates a spiral if they're stepping and everyone's saying, well, actually, the World Rugby doesn't say that you should do that, and the SRU are wrong, and then it all just snowballs that way as well.
And as you said, it's a high performance sporting environment. Why would you? And this is very definitely not me being frivolous. It is me playing devil's advocate. But why would you potentially put yourself at a competitive disadvantage?
Yes.
And, even if it's the right thing to do, there's a huge amount of pressure, especially in the women's game. You've got sponsors, you've got all of this. Scottish women have had a really tough time with results and things like that. You're not going to... Unless someone forces you to, you're not going to competitively disadvantage yourself. Well,
sorry guys. Sorry, on you go. I was just going to.
That's why what Brian Eason is alleged to have been overheard saying. He's just saying that probably because Cattigan is one of the best players on the pitch, and he knows what he can bring to that team.
And also, I don't know how their comms work. Was it even directed at that situation?
Yeah.
I mean, part of me, if it was, that it's not acceptable, but we don't know that it was. And part of me, I don't know Brian Eason, I don't have any skin in this game. But that's another reason for an independent investigation, because it might be that this is out of context. There could be all sorts of things going on here. And you want to make sure that people have actually got the right story.
Yeah, because what sort of best possible scenario of what he said is, I want her on the pitch because she's one of the best players and we know what she can do. But we don't know that he knows she's been KO'd or, is definitely going off for an HIA or, what have you. Maybe it's just more of a hopeful thing. Whereas in other situations, there's been not exactly malicious intent, but people have gone, right, we know this player's injured, especially in like NFL and things like that. We know this person has this injury, but we want them on. We are forcing them on. So I think there's definitely a difference there until we know all of the facts.
Yeah, because to be honest, we don't know if he said it or not, and that's the thing.
And we don't know the context it was said in.
Yeah. Exactly.
So will we move on to slightly different situation now? We'll move on to the sort of next thing in the timeline. There's description of the tour. There's 3 weeks in Italy in the autumn of 2021. There's some discussion about, and it's interesting, you guys all mentioned high performance sports environments. There's a mention about the kind of type of environment that rugby is. Alex Popham has talked about this at length as well, about the continuing macho environment that rugby high performance environments tend to be. Descriptions of struggling, Siobhan struggling with anxiety during the trip, struggling to speak up. Ellen Dixon and Rachel Malcolm both spoke to her prior to a game to check if she was in the right headspace to play. I mean, it's interesting for me that you've got, so obviously we've had the situation with New Zealand rugby, New Zealand women's rugby recently, speaking about kind of toxic environment that existed, making people very unhappy to be in that environment due to, the constant criticism, the sort of way that people are talked to. I'll come at you first, Ian. Like we've talked before about this, about that kind of toxic environment, and how we think in some ways the men's game is moving away from that. Players talk about kind of truth sessions, they call them, but there is almost like players are very critical of themselves, but almost you think the environment that Gregor Townsend's created for Scotland is quite, you look at your mistakes honestly, and then you move on. It doesn't seem to be a shouting and swearing type of environment, but it's quite surprising to see that written down, describing that trip to Italy.
Yeah, it seems we should be moving away from a bullying culture. Like you think about when we were kids. It's well, possibly. You get these dictatorial sort of coaches just shouting at you like, "Oh, you need to do this. You need to be harder." There's a lot of, especially with I think West Coast Scottish people. Usually everything's quite aggressive. There's a lot of effing and blinding, and you should beat even in football. So I think, what we have there is, she's been told that she's not loud enough. She's been more like whoever else, because the names are blurred out. Player management needs to be more nuanced now. You will have loud, abrasive characters in the squad. You will have quieter members of the squad who will still do the same job on the pitch. You just need to sort of nurture them and sort of bring them out of their shell, or just make sure they're comfortable in whatever size shell they're in, and not try and make them be someone who they're not. And although we talk about this improvement in culture, I remember like the very first press conference for Glasgow Warriors I sat in on was when Fraser Brown had just been made the captain, and obviously the work he's done for mental health charities. But this just followed on from Matt Smith announcing his retirement from rugby, and how he didn't feel that there was an environment at the Glasgow Warriors where he could go and speak about mental health issues or performance issues and what have you. So again, like I said, it's we seem to pay a lot of lip service to it, but not particularly follow it through. So if Siobhan's being told you need to be more like this and this, why is she being told to completely change her personality and style? We know what she was like as a performer. She's doing her job. It's around the team to bring everyone together to increase their performances, improve their performance level.
That's a difficult one, Ian, because and then I need to then look at my outlook on rugby. I went from a male coaching side of things to a female coaching side of things, and I did change my coaching style completely, because I'd grown up and I have come through rugby of being shouted at and told get on with it and do it or you're dropped, and that didn't work for me when I first started, and it became very, 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 very quickly I realised that my coaching style was wrong, and I changed it. The issue I have, though, just can I be very, very clear on my side of things? I will still talk to players on a pitch and say, I need you to be louder. I need you to be more communicative, because communication and talking on the field for me is one of the biggest parts of the game. So on that particular wording, and again, I haven't read that part of the article, so I don't know what else is in there, Ian. So I'm not trying to pick you up, or I'm just trying to say on my side of things. It makes me kind of start thinking about my own coaching side of things. I don't equate me telling someone I need you to be louder, I need you to communicate more with a bullying culture. However, if there is, I usually follow up with a discussion afterwards. And how are you, how we talked about this, what are you thinking? But, is there anything we can do to help you with that? And that's where the secondary part of the conversation has to be is, yes, on the training field, things do get heated and things are, usually I raise my voice because I can't hear. People either aren't hearing me, or I get frustrated at times when people ignore what I'm asking them to do. So there are times that does happen. I tend, again, it's the old adage of don't single people out. Talk to the team rather than one person, etc. But so what happens on the training field sometimes may go down that route, especially with it being a rugby, being a sort of a contact sport and a how can I put it, a more combative sport as such. But when you go to, and so maybe it can be looked upon as that coach is being loud and shouty, he really shouldn't be doing that. But on the other side of things, it's what's going on in the background. Are they being looked after that way? Because I always to my players to say, look, I was shouting at that point, but the reason I was shouting was because of this, and I was frustrated with this, and we'll talk about, so that's the big question to be asked.
So the article itself states, so there's no place for anxiety. And so Siobhan had been literally screamed at several times. There's no place for anxiety on this team, and being scolded consistently for not being loud enough. So I think that, like, I know exactly what you're saying, Craig, and I've been in coaching environments myself where exactly that, you do raise your voice and you do, you say, yeah, we try not to single players out, but sometimes you need someone to do something. And that you have to, and that's part of. We're not talking about it's a different type of environment, a different, like we've all had situations where you're in your job and you don't expect to be shouted at in your job. That's fair, but sport does continue to still be different. But I think the term "scalded consistently" does indicate that there's an element of singling out there that maybe,
and even the next paragraph,
quite right. But again,
the next paragraph falls on something Craig said. When Craig said he'd go and follow up afterwards if he'd maybe shouted at somebody during the training session.
Yes.
They were clear as concern because the coach said manager Alan Dixon, and Siobhan and Room asked if she was in the right headspace to be selected for the next game. Why wasn't this followed up? Because there wasn't enough follow up, and this.
And I think that's the worrying bit for me, is the fact that if you've got someone who is a Scotland Cup player who has had all of these traits as a fairly abrasive back row player, and then you're, after a period of time, they're now starting to have anxiety and they're talking about anxiety on the field, then there is something wrong, whether it's with them, whether it's with your style of coaching, whether it's with something that's going on in the background. And again, that's the situation of, well, hang on a minute, that player has changed dramatically from where they were when I first knew them, when they played the game. Now, if it's not a positive change, then that, again, just as Ian says, the follow-up has to be there.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. And again, you would expect that in any environment that you were in. We've all got jobs, and certainly I've been in positions where good managers, not even good managers, people, colleagues, whoever might pick up on if you're doing slightly different or you're feeling slightly different, and in that type of environment as well, I think it's obviously we are talking about a situation where players want to play and they're conditioned in this environment, and it's really difficult because players can be really difficult to work with in these environments. But if you're having to intervene where you're literally having to ask the question, are you in the right headspace, then that's probably indicative that you're not. And that follow up and that duty of care probably needed to be a wee bit better at that point. And that kind of brings us on to probably the next point, and I'll come to you next. Now, the article from here, it's already an incredibly difficult read at this point, but it starts to detail some of the deterioration and some of the issues. Siobhan starts to suffer quite badly, paranoia, anxiety. Communication becomes an issue with the SRU. There's issues here, and obviously you've mentioned about your background and stuff. There is issues about, so the press are pummeling into the SRU a little bit about the various things that they can't say regarding the medical care that's taking place. And I guess it'd be interesting to hear your point of view on that, because the first article itself is pretty damning of the care, and certainly the parents have spoken about reaching out for more care. And the response was, obviously they're covered under kind of medical license that they can't, General Medical Council says they can't really disclose patient confidentiality, which is absolutely correct. So I'll pass to you on that, and you can maybe give us your view on what I know. Sorry.
This is the bit I think even Jim Hamilton said in the podcast I keep referring to, that this is the point, I had to put the article down and walk away and then come to it because it is absolutely heartbreaking. And the idea that Siobhan's family strongly believe, as the article articulates, that they were let down, and not just by the SRU. It's a whole catalogue of. I don't have the words for it, and it's just so sad, and I just find this really hard to talk about, because what keeps coming to the front of my mind is that this is a family who have lost a daughter and who tried so hard to get her help, and for whatever reason that didn't happen. And you were saying earlier, John, that you'd done a lot of research and you'd written a lot of notes for this, as did I, because it's such an emotional subject that you want to do it justice. And one of the things, well-being is one of the three key themes that the SRU focus on, which is absolutely brilliant. But I think what we've all been saying here is that, is it just lip service? And certainly what one of the medics at Progressive Rugby said to me, and what a lot of other people have said to me, is that compassion and player welfare has to extend beyond the playing field. It's not just, while somebody's undergoing a head injury assessment, or while somebody is, going through rehab because they broke their leg. It's all of it. And it's what Craig was saying earlier, that when you notice differences in someone, negative differences in their personality, they've become withdrawn, for example, they're anxious. Surely, I don't know. You follow up. I'm talking in circles here, because I can't believe what happened at the end of the day. It is just absolutely unbelievable. And it's terrifying as well, because you think, if that could happen to Siobhan, what's to say it couldn't happen to somebody else? And that's my yeah. That's my real. I have said, when the David Walsh article was published, I said right away that there needs to be an independent inquiry into this, and it is not about blaming people. It is about making sure that the processes and the protocols in place, and that the support in place is adequate. And you have to look at and it needs to be independent, because you can't mark your own homework. That's an absolute basic. And it's to make sure that it's to learn from this, because this cannot have been in vain. when the SRU talks about player welfare, I mean, surely the first thing is something this awful. You need to make sure that nobody else goes through this, and it's never going to be perfect, but it should be the processes and protocols in place. And I'm not talking about the HIA. I'm talking about how Siobhan was cared for when she came back from Italy. You need to make sure that you're doing everything possible to support people. And you add in COVID into all of this, and I mean, it's just awful.
And this is one of the worrying and probably my more upsetting side of things is the fact that the truth is that because and we talk about the women's game and the professional athletes needing to be paid, paid as a job and do it as the living. The money's not in there at the moment to do that. We're being told the money's not there to do that. What if they can't pay? And if they can't pay their players, what else are they not paying for? And that's that's the, we have, you go to club level and you have clubs that have teams from primary 3 all the way through to senior level that don't have physios. And we're talking about a game that is a game of attrition. It's a game that can be described as a game of aggression, a game of contact. So it's down to those people to then go to their own physio if they have a problem with a leg or an arm, or a mind physio, as in going to get checked up because of a concussion or something like that. And that's where we can't, in my opinion, we can no longer play at this anymore. The funding needs to be there, and I'm sure there is funding there, and they feel they are doing the best they possibly can at this moment in time. But I don't think, as we've talked about regularly on this podcast, it's not enough, because we're finding that there are male players within the game that are coming to the fore from 5-10 years ago who are now having problems, and they're saying that they weren't looked after. I'll tell you right now, I can guarantee that the funding and the doctors are all in place. As we talked about Nick's earlier on, we don't think there's an independent doctor looking after the women's game in international form, never mind anything else. But I'll tell you what, there's an independent doctor with the club, the Premiership, also the European Championships, also the international games, for the men's side of things, and that's where the juxtaposition lies. What's the difference?
And I think Alistair Reid wrote an article. He's written several articles in the Times since David Rush's article was published, and he asked the question: would the standard of care have been the same if this had been Finn Russell or Stuart Hogg? And and he was looking at it in light of the review of Cricket Scotland and saying, is the SRU institutionally sexist? And it's a really difficult one to think about, to look at, and to think. The money in the game and all of that, but the idea that the standard of care could have been different, we don't know. But again, that's something that an independent review would look at, and it could look and say, well, we do this for the men, should we be doing this for the women as well?
So I think I tweeted that something like 24 hours after, or maybe in reply to Alistair Reid, and I said, yeah, if that was Hogg or Russell, well, Hogg would get a police escort limo down to Ross Hall. Finn Russell maybe get the bus fare. But then, when you look at things like the film Concussion that I watched earlier, and read into that, and what I think happens is that, and with the Aussie Rules one, and this sounds like, well, I mean, this sounds callous, but I imagine it's almost how some of them. But when you hear some of the sort of comments made in the Stephen Thompson lawsuit, for example, it is a sort of it's like a profit loss thought. They view the players as commodities, and it's like in Fight Club when Ed Norton says, he recalls a bunch of cars. What they do is they either figure out, is it worth it to do a whole recall of cars to settle lawsuits, or to keep selling the cars? So is it worth it to keep, hammering these players out, getting your money's worth out of them, and then, if a lawsuit came along, you could maybe try and fudge it. And that's why there was so much suppression of medical evidence back in the mid-2000s. I mean, maybe not fudge it exactly, but try and downplay the symptoms or the your part in these instances.
There's a couple of things to look at, though. I think to go back to your statement, Nix, I don't think the SRU are sexist. I think rugby as a whole is sexist.
Yep.
And the SRU are just one of the cogs in the wheel.
I think absolutely fair.
And I think to talk the other way with you, Ian, the problem you have and the problem the players have, and it's been described quite a lot in many different books and different comments that have been made, there are far too many younger players now on the scene, and way back, even back to early years, there's younger people there that will fill the space. And so again, yes, I think you're right, especially professional teams. The players are commodities, and if they're not performing, there's another one on the ranks to come along and fill the gap. And I think you'll see that, for example, if you see some of the reports that came out of Glasgow, and I'm only saying Glasgow because that's what I've seen written. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen at Edinburgh. But if you look at some of the players that are coming out of Glasgow that may not have had, or may not having the career that, say, Finn Russell or Stuart Hogg are having,
Stuart Hogg,
and they're missing, they're saying they're not getting the sort of the backup or the help that they need. I'll tell you what, Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell and all that will be getting all the help they need, because they're the ones that bring the money in. They're the ones that are the headline players, the marquee players, to use a phrase that the English Premiership use on a regular basis. So I'm not saying that all clubs are the same, but I would say that there are those players within professional clubs that fall between the cracks, because they're maybe not at that they don't have that following, or they're not playing to the level that they're on the pitch every weekend.
I think that's an absolutely valid point, Craig, and it goes to the heart of. So in that instance, it goes to the heart of professional sport. And again, we'll use professional sport as the descriptor. Obviously, we're again acutely aware that women's rugby is not professional.
Yeah.
Maybe it goes to the heart of a high performance sport. And I've been very candid on this podcast quite a few times that, we talk about exclusion in sport. High performance sport in its very being is exclusive and doesn't, it is a case of perform or go. And there's loads of arguments to say that is short-sighted and is not in the best interest of the individuals, and is not creating an environment where people get to perform their best or are able to showcase their talents to the greatest extent. But that's the reality of elite sport, and that really kind of maybe there's a culture shift in all of elite sport that needs to happen, which would be incredible, but it doesn't seem likely that would be the case, because again, sport by its very nature is competitive, and you've got young, as Craig says, you've got young guys champing at the bit in any opportunity to take someone's place. Any misfortune, anything that happens, those guys will be delighted to go and get on the park. Yeah, it might be their mate that's suffering, but they'll still be proud because they get to further their career, and that's the nature of it. And it's horrible to talk about. It's horrible to talk about. So,
but that's why they keep forcing on, players who we assume might be injured.
Yeah,
I mean, the most shocking one I've ever seen, and I've spoken about this a couple of times because it was absolutely horrifying to see it live. Conor Murray v Glasgow Warriors. I was, sitting pitch side, and Murray gets decked and he's KO'd. Like, he hits the. I think Swinson ran into him and caught him with his forearm. Murray went to tackle him. Swinson caught him in the forearm, right in the jaw. Murray face planted. He was down for 3 seconds, didn't move. Face down, didn't move. Doctor comes on, says, "Nah, he's fine." Straight back on. So I think Warriors had scrum ball. Ball went back to Josh Strauss. Josh Strauss, what did he first do? Looked at Conor Murray and ran into him at full pelt. And that's like a rampaging Josh Strauss. Like, hand out, like, "I am going to smash your face in, me, man." And you feared for Murray at that point, because it was. I remember one of our friends, Mr. Wallace, fierce, fan and frequent listener. He kind of had a little bit of a go at the Irish FA on Twitter about it. I was like, "Dan, don't pick that battle," because
no,
this is a unilateral problem that we are not paying proper heed to head injuries. We all know it. We've seen it for ages, and the day of reckoning is coming at the risk of something all biblical.
Progressive Rugby published, when did they publish it? I think last week or the week before. And this is just at the elite level, not the community level. But they published a series of quite straightforward measures that they would like to see implemented in the game. Things like a blanket minimum 21-day non-negotiable stand down, limited contact training, game limit reduced to 25 games. Because, of course, there was that incident when England were playing Australia, and I can't remember the fullback's name. He went over his 30-game limit. And it's all that sort of stuff that it's high-performance sport. It's a competitive environment. There are all sorts of pressures going on. You want to win, but win at what cost? And I think that's the lesson that it's so difficult, because that's the lesson that World Rugby and then the unions feeding into World Rugby that they need to learn. And I think some people do realise that. I think they know that. Alan Gilpin, who's the chief exec of World Rugby, did an interview with the Telegraph last Thursday. World Rugby are now not speaking to Progressive Rugby. There was I believe, quite a constructive dialogue going on. I was not party to it. But because Alex Popham is involved with Progressive Rugby, and he's involved in the litigation, they won't talk to us, which is, I think it's so sad, because at the end of the day, we've all got the same objective. We all love rugby. We want to make it safer, and we want to protect the players. And it is difficult because the litigation's going on, and I keep having to say on our WhatsApp chat, it will be the insurers' lawyers, because the insurers' lawyers are desperate to avoid a large payout. They're not going to be able to. There's now, I think, close to 200 players involved in the litigation against the RFU, the WRU, and World Rugby. I don't know how many are involved in Scotland yet. I believe it's close to 20-25. There's something going on in Ireland. It could potentially end rugby if it's not properly handled. But the bit, and I keep harping on about this, but the bit that really concerns me is that we're talking about the litigation is dealing with the players. It's already happened to them, and that is desperately sad. but not, the money will make sure that they are taken care of, that their families are taken care of, that they get the best possible medical treatment. In the case of Siobhan, the litigation, the money will get, any money that's won will go to charity. As her father said, they've lost her. But what concerns me is the people who are playing at the moment, because World Rugby is not implementing changes that could be implemented to protect them. So they get caught between, as a bad analogy, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. The players, not World Rugby. And that to me is terrifying, because where is the player welfare? And this extending, they shouldn't be back on a pitch within 12 days. Johnny Sexton was back 6 days later. Or he failed his HIA-1, but he passed his HIA-2, so he's not concussed. It was like, hang on a minute, they'd found, we're sitting there again, but all they've done is found a loophole in the process. They're talking about a gold standard. I'm like, it's not a gold standard. It can't be a gold standard, because you've actually just exploited your own loophole.
I think that's where I have, as far as I'm concerned, though, and we've said this before, World Rugby are toothless, because they don't have the money in the game, they don't have the skin in the game. They're open to too many commercial enterprises pulling them from pillar to post.
Because
no, well, the thing is,
players. They care about money. That's it.
Well, the problem I think is that yes, that might be and is probably correct, but there will be people that are human in World Rugby who are wanting to try and solve problems. The problem they have is that currently, at this moment in time, the amount of money that's involved from the different unions and the different professional bodies, etc., it's probably, and this sounds terrible, but it's probably right at this moment in time cheaper to pay someone off and get them to sign a non-disclosure than to actually put things into place. Because as far as I'm concerned, you have to take away any doubt. So, for example, if you talk about a head knock on a pitch, the doubt has to be taken away. So, as far as I'm concerned, as you said, Nix, you set a time. If they're coming off the field, they're coming off the field for 3 to 6 weeks. And that's the way it is. And it's across the board. Because I know players that have torn calf muscles, torn. I know it's not the same as a brain injury, but they've hurt themselves and will go back on the pitch, and they're fully engaged with with their conscious, because it's not a brain injury, but they will go and do that because they want to be back on the pitch. So you have to take that away from them, because they're not making. They shouldn't be. The players should not be making the decision. Yeah, I'm fine, coach. Put me back on the field. And the coaches should not be making that decision because they've got all the other external pressures on them. Sorry, I ranted a little bit there.
No. Do you think?
No, you didn't.
I think we need a lot of time. What we end up with is the medical professionals and other people as well. Well, we'll start with the medical professionals. There's a bit of self-interest in there. Right, every game should have an independent doctor doing HIAs, or as we've seen, they've got these saliva tests they can maybe do for concussion, which are going to be trialled. And I think the women's 15s, and I think it may be in Australian football, not Aussie rules football, like Australian soccer. But as well as the independent doctors, I mean, we've seen some of the. But what I particularly remember is Finn Russell's red card against France when we won it in the 84th minute. Right? Why is it the French TV directors can only find a couple of angles when it comes to a decision which might go in their favour? I mean, this is off the chart, but this is we should have more independence in rugby in terms of big decisions. Especially medical decisions, like we said, who was the Irish prop that I think it was the first test against New Zealand looked like the
game against Mary's Lohman, and then they did an inquiry the next day, realised they had failure.
Yeah. I mean, that was a straight out. I mean, that guy stumbled back then, decked it. He should have been off the pitch straight away. But this happened a few times with him. We've seen other injury. Well, the 800-minute France v Wales game where French tight heads went down with knee injuries, which led to HIAs. This is why we need independent doctors. We need independent people on the sidelines to say, no, hang on, I'll do this, rather than you can have your own physios and what have you, and that. But when it comes to stuff like that, it needs to be independent. There needs to be no skin in the game whatsoever. It just needs to be, this is for this person's welfare. This is for this player's welfare, and that's all I'm concerned about.
I think it's Tanny Gray-Thompson wrote a paper 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember who she wrote the paper for, but it was basically saying that exactly what you've just said, Ian, that across sport, medics need to be completely independent because otherwise there is a conflict. And I'd go to the level of, you have match day officials, have a couple of medics in there as well that are employed or allocated or whatever by the Six Nations or by World Rugby, and that have as little affiliation as possible with either of the teams playing, and are purely there to protect the players. But I mean, the logistics, it might be something, it's something that could be trialled at the World Cup next year. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. They managed to do it with lawyers for 2019. But I think it would be interesting to see the level, see if there's a difference in the level of care. But it would certainly give a huge amount of reassurance.
Was lawyers in 2019 Mark Dawson's suggesting many chance?
No, after 2015.
That's why I raised my eyebrow at that point.
No, it was not Mark Dodson.
No,
in 2015, some of the tier 2, and I hate using that phrase, but some of the tier 2 teams got red cards. They found it very difficult to get legal representation. They didn't have the money to pay for it. So in 2019, World Rugby had a pool of lawyers for those teams. There's a great guy I follow on Twitter, we chat sometimes, called Aaron Lloyd, who's a New Zealander, and he was one of them. And it worked really, really well. It just meant that they got better representation, and it was far more balanced across the board. Didn't agree with a lot of the decisions, but at least everybody was given an equal opportunity.
Talking about tier 2 and people who don't US, Stanley. Former guest. That was a good interview, and then
it was a very good interview.
Then he went all J.K. Rowling.
Right. So we'll plough on. We're at a situation now. So obviously the articles that have been released have kind of detailed. Siobhan Cattigan, sadly, 26th of November 2021, she died, and the articles themselves detail some of the things that have been said to have happened in the time after then. I should again note that the SRU have responded to some of this, saying it's not necessarily things they recognise, but we'll come to that. So just as a few things that I've kind of noted. Obviously, we should caveat all this. You guys have indicated throughout as well that there is litigation taking place. There is intent for action has been submitted, or is in the process of being submitted, as was confirmed at the AGM by Mark Dodson. So we know there is litigation taking place. So obviously, everybody involved in this has to be very careful about what they say. Hence, some of the interviews have been slightly more generic. Let's go with that. I think that's the term. But a couple of things I've noted. So from the Times article, the family have suggested that there was an indication players were kind of told not to attend, or weren't given much of an option to attend the funeral. There was, and certainly they were also told not to contact the family. The SRU have stated this was them respecting the family's wishes. Obviously, the family disagree with that. There was also the stuff around tributes that I kind of indicated earlier on. There was an opportunity to perhaps have a tribute at the Open Internationals. That didn't happen. The women's team were able to. They were going to have a tribute on their game, and there was a debate about the crest being up or down. The players, it seems, their wishes weren't necessarily respected with regards to how Siobhan was respected in that instance. So. I mean, there's a few other things kind of come out of it as well, but we'll move on kind of to the response that's come out. Ian, you've read the articles that have come out. You obviously read the press coverage of the AGM and obviously the response to the article itself. The SRU don't help themselves, do they?
No, it all seems like the initial response, I feel, seems kind of cut and paste. And then, the AGM, although one thing that I think it was Alistair Reid or maybe Stuart Bathgate in the offside line, not a single member at the club AGM or the first part of it raised the Siobhan Cattigan issue. So I find that a wee bit disconcerting. I don't know if Sterling were there or what have you. But like I said, I mean, the whole thing just seems very lawyer talk. And no disrespect, obviously, to Nick's, but my brother's also a lawyer.
No, I'm technically not a lawyer, so you're safe.
All right, cool. So no, it's and the thing with the whole crest up, crest down, or specifically the way that it's described in the article by Siobhan's parents, it sounds callous. It sounds more like a marketing thing than a callous, like, you have to have the crest up. It's like, no, but this isn't about just this game of rugby. It's about honouring our friend, our player, somebody who was so integral to us in that group. Because Siobhan Cattigan was, like, I think I'd seen her play 5 times maybe. And I was like, wonderful, wonderful rugby player. Like, obviously she's in like competition with Jade Conkle, or Jade the Conqueror, as I like to call her. A pure, like, a proper glass ceiling breaker for women's rugby in Scotland. And Rachel Malcolm's obviously in the back row as well. It's just sort of, that. It's very kind of dull, and like I said, I some of it seemed callous. Like,
I think,
Nick, in you come.
The bit that really got me, and I think it was Mark Palmer and I think Tom English who was saying that there were no questions asked at the AGM. And I actually put a tweet out, and if anybody is listening to this and you're going to the second part of the AGM and you want help wording a question or something, please get in touch. Pro bono, I think I've got a big thing about governance. You can't complain about the SRU if you go to the AGM and you don't then ask questions. But that's a rant for a different day. I think what really got me is that so few people from the SRU contacted Siobhan's parents to express their condolences. And I was really taken aback when Siobhan's dad said to me that the only contact they'd had from, the higher echelons was an attachment to an email that was sent to her uncle. And part of me did think, oh gosh, And then, the BBC, the question and answer that they did with Mark Dodson and James Robson and John Jeffrey after the AGM, sure enough, it's in there. And that's, they didn't, and it was, I think it was an email, the attachment was a letter from the outgoing president. Nothing from Dodson, nothing from Jeffrey. Now, I don't know about Dodson. I know John Jeffrey's a parent. You would think in that situation that you don't know what to say. Nobody knows what to say. It's an absolutely awful, tragic situation. But you write a letter and you say, Siobhan, she played brilliantly in this match, and you do a bit of research and you bring compassion and empathy to the forefront. And the lack of that, and I know, I mean, the reason that John Jeffrey, one of the reasons he gave for there not being an independent review is that it would have taken 2 years and they couldn't have done that. I'm not actually quoting directly, but they couldn't have done that to their people. Well, Siobhan was one of their people. And surely you want to know what happened. And you want to show her family that level of respect. And I appreciate that the independent inquiry can't now happen because of the legal action. So feasibly, it could happen in a courtroom. And that as well, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this could have happened 6 months ago. And the Cricket Scotland inquiry, that took 6 months. There's absolutely no reason that an inquiry would have taken 2 years.
So I think, like, the fact they said, "Oh, they're not one of our people." She was. Like, maybe not directly employed.
He didn't say that she wasn't one of their people. He just focused on he couldn't do that to, I suppose, his current people. But the implication is there, and it was like, well, she played 19 times for Scotland.
So that almost sounds like you're trying to cover up for people that who might have done her wrong. And I mean, she's part of the Scottish Rugby Union. She played for a team of the Scottish Rugby Union.
She was wearing
to be balanced, though, he does have a responsibility in his role to make sure that the guys that are under his employ and under the employ of the SRU are appropriately supported.
But
whether
I think
there is the argument.
I think that's symptomatic of the SRU's approach to a lot of things. And I mean, we're going back to the Keith Russell affair, to the typhoon in Japan, that they come out all guns blazing and they think that scrutiny is a bad thing. I think scrutiny is a good thing. Accountability and responsibility are good things. An independent review in tragic circumstances is not about blaming people. It's about finding out what happened.
And even when you got when we got our review into the Keith Russell affair, half it was redacted. Because I remember John and Cammy doing the podcast about it, and
it was a difficult podcast to do because we didn't have much to speak about because it was all
they talk about
behind.
Again, it's lip service. It's all about it's accountability and this that, and then they just redact half of it. I mean, like they're more secretive than the CIA. Is Old Glory actually just a drug laundering, side business that they're doing?
Ian, we have to be very clear that Old Glory, for goodness sake.
It's not a Patreon episode.
We're talking about money in the women's game, and that's what the best part of £1 million it's been written off.
At least.
And some of the governance, especially about redacting reports and the lack of transparency, that really frustrates me because this is not a private company. This is a sporting governing body. They are answerable to the clubs, to all of the stakeholders. So be open and honest. And I genuinely, as soon as somebody starts behaving the way that Dodson and Jeffrey were behaving in this interview, this BBC article, my brain just goes to, right, what have you got to hide? What have you been up to?
Craig.
I mean, James Robson is the only one who comes out of that with any credit whatsoever as being a compassionate, empathetic individual.
That tends to happen.
We'll come to James Robson in a second, Craig. I'll come to you just quickly. The description of the SRU's response in the media has been lacking basic humanity, empathy, or compassion. What's your feel for that? Have you read the response from the SRU?
I've read a bit of it. It's very much. I think we've talked about it earlier on. I think the bottom line with the SRU is that they are circling the wagons, and so they are looking upon it as the least said the better because there's a legal case now, and I'm not. And please, as I say, I'm trying to stay absolutely balanced on this one. I am finding it very difficult to because I know people within the SRU. I know people within the women's rugby. I'm a human being. I am hopefully I'm a compassionate human being. So it's there are so, you know, and we have to be careful when, you know, people are talking about many different responses, and the bottom line is that parents and family have lost their child, and you know, we especially when we're talking about different things within the SRU, etc. They're under investigation legally. They're going to circle the wagons, and they're not going to give the press anything that will, you know, we talk about the players who seem to come across without a personality because they're being media managed. I can guarantee that John Jeffrey and Mark Dodson are being media managed. So, you know, yes, it may come across as cold and inhuman and this, that, and the other. They are not letting. They're not going to let emotion come into it at all, because it can be, whether it's one way or the other, it can be all of a sudden splashed all over the press that Dodson said this or John Jeffrey said that, but also within a legal side of things, it can be then thrown up to them in a league. So they're going to just keep it stum. And that's okay, you know, and that's where James Robson is slightly different, because no matter, you know, he's a medical professional. He's confident in what he has done and what his team have done, and he is. And most medical professionals, whether they seem cold when you're going into the doctors to talk about whatever your problem is, they do actually care. And I think, their job is people. Whereas Dodson and John Jeffrey, etc., they have a different job, and they will be managed within an inch of their life.
Certainly in this case, because yeah, I think again, as with World Rugby, I think there are insurers involved.
Yeah,
there'll be insurance company lawyers involved. I think that we know that Dodson is. I'm trying to think how to word this diplomatically. Communication with the media over.
I could do it not so diplomatically.
No, you can't. We're still on public.
Communication with the media over touchy subjects is not his strong point.
Yes.
And it's one of those situations, you know, the chief executive, he had to front up, but I think he could have been media managed better, said possibly even less, but come across as a better person.
I agree.
I think, so whoever their advisors are, I think either hasn't ever watched him talk to the media before or didn't advise him well enough.
I don't know. I just wonder if he's maybe gone for like a whole Trumpian thing of, the people who will advise me will tell me exactly what I want to hear.
Well, you can't do that now. The insurance company's involved.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's interesting as well, isn't it? So obviously, as part of that article, the headlines that come out of these, and obviously we have to, you know, we've spent a bit of time researching this, and we're trying to give a balanced view. You know, obviously there's going to be legal action. Things are going to come out. You know, Dodson was quoted as saying the optics of this are not what we're trying to establish. We're trying to establish the facts. And I think, do you know what? In some cases, that's fair. That's a fair thing. Like, yes, the look isn't great, but ultimately it's about, you know, what are the facts of the situation and what do we learn from this? One of the headlines that came out, though, the SRU stated, or John Jeffries stated that the courts might in fact be the most appropriate place to look into this death. And again, it's such a difficult subject. It's such a difficult situation they're in that I think they're absolutely right in that. And the thing that also followed on with that, John Jeffries stated that he's comfortable with the actions of our people, and we've talked about that as a statement as well. It's such a difficult situation for them that this is going to play out in the way it does in a very public forum and under the banner of everything else that's happening in rugby, with, you know, trans rights, with concussion, with everything else that's going on in rugby at this point in time, it's such a horrible situation to be playing out, and it's hard being a rugby fan just now. I think that it's difficult being a rugby fan just now, because you've got all these things going on that detract from the game, and it's really sad. It makes me really sad. Like, obviously the whole situation makes me incredibly sad, but like from a rugby fan's perspective, it's so difficult. But ultimately, we're in a position where we're not the people that are at the what we think or feel doesn't actually matter in this instance, because there's people in way more challenging situations, and the press is going to continue to have their way with this, and hopefully everyone gets to have their say, and gets to have the appropriate methods and appropriate governance is put into place. So we're probably going to wrap up there, because I think an hour and a half is plentiful. I think, is anybody get anything else they want to add? Closing statements, since we're doing this legally style.
The only thing I've been asked
you come in first.
The only thing I've been asked to add by Progressive Rugby is that, despite comments in the media, we are not party to any of the legal action which is going on. So whether it's the Cattigans, whether it's the legal action against World Rugby, our focus is on making sure that lessons are learned. Sorry, I'm reading from a script. And that current and future players are protected as far as possible from the same fate. So just so there's total clarity on that one. And as well, I mean, I don't know if Siobhan's parents will listen to this, but I mean, my absolute condolences to them. I don't know what to say. It's just such an awful situation.
So I was going to say, like, John, you sound a bit defeatist there. But we should keep raising these points. We should keep, not exactly promoting, but keep mentioning these issues, and this case in particular, and all the other things, because if you're a fan of rugby, you just maybe look at it and go, right, we've lost a really talented young player. But what's happened is there's a young woman who is adored and loved by many people. From everything I've heard about her, like from the articles and from people who maybe met her once or twice. Right, we've lost a wonderful young woman, and our family are devastated by that. And the SRU need to investigate exactly how this came to be when it was kind of on their watch. They should be doing more to look into it. And we've all seen. It's not just this. We've all seen things about CTE and early onset dementia, all these kind of things. Rugby's day of reckoning is coming, and there needs to be more compassion and thought into how that we play this game, and in terms of safety as well.
I think that's fair. Craig, have you got anything to? Have you got anything to see us off with?
I think for me, I think it's more I'd far rather look for calm in this rather media-led storm. I feel we have to understand, and everyone has to understand, their actions within this. And I'm not talking about the immediate people. I'm talking about fans. I'm talking about people within our community of being commentators on things, etc. Just the general rugby fan out there. They have to understand that there's two people looking to find out an answer of why they've lost their daughter. And I think that has to be, we have to remember that in everything that we do. And it's, we have to be a little bit careful's the wrong word. That's not what I'm trying to put across. I would like everyone who is talking about this or is involved about this, and I'm including the SRU in this, I'm including the press in this, I'm including the family in this, is that there are people out there hurting a dramatic amount, and we can never replace what they've lost. And so we have to make sure that we get to the bottom of whatever happens, why they have lost a daughter. And that's, and they're allowed to hurt, and they're allowed to grieve,
That's it in a nutshell, isn't it? It's about lessons learned and making sure that you can't change. We can't change what's happened to date, but we can certainly learn and we can improve and we can make sure this hopefully should never happen again. And that's really where we should be aiming for. So no, that's valid points, Craig. So I think we will close up at that. So thank you everybody that's watched this live. Thank you who's listening back on audio. Thank you, Nix, for joining us. It's been great having you along. And thank you to Ian and Craig as well. So yeah, it is goodbye from me. Goodbye from Ian, Craig, and Nix.
Thanks very much, Nix.
Thank you.